In this short video, we are looking at how Theodore Roosevelt used his leadership in foreign affairs to better the United States government. The Venezuela debt crisis began in 1901 when Caprino Castro, Venezuela's president, defaulted millions of dollars in bonds owed to European nations. The bonds were owed to Germany, Italy, and Great Britain as they threatened military intervention if the debt was not repaid. The foreign debt was for damages suffered by European citizens in the recent Venezuela civil war. President Castro refused to engage in settlement talks and did little to resolve the escalating crisis. President Theodore Roosevelt believed that the European nations were justified in their intervening in Venezuela in order to protect their citizens and property. Hermann Steinberg, a German diplomat and personal friend of President Roosevelt, wrote the president to explain Germany's intentions to collect its debt. Roosevelt responded by approving Germany's plans, but he also warned Germans not to seize any territory in Venezuela. With the prior promise that no such seizure would occur, Teddy Roosevelt allowed the action to go ahead without objection. The blockade saw Venezuela's small navy quickly disabled, but Castro refused to give in and instead agreeing to the principle to submit some of the claims to international arbitrations which had previously rejected. President Roosevelt became leery of the continued European intervention in the region. By January 1903, the boycott had devastated Venezuela's economy. A desperate Castro asked President Roosevelt to negotiate a settlement. Not surprisingly, Roosevelt jumped at the opportunity to restore order in the Western Hemisphere. He responded to the crisis by pressuring all parties to reach a settlement. The crisis ended in February of 1903 when Venezuela's leaders agreed to reserve 30% of the country's customs duties until all debt claims had been settled. Theodore Roosevelt did not wish to see European intervention in the Western Hemisphere again, so he announced the Monroe Doctrine in 1904, which did not allow Eastern Hemisphere countries to have military power in the Western Hemisphere. The Venezuela crisis showed Teddy's leadership as president. Not only was he able to keep European nations out of the Western Hemisphere, he was also able to settle a foreign problem without war breaking out. The cause of the Venezuela crisis was due to Venezuela not paying their debt to the respective European nations after the Venezuela Civil War. The consequence of not paying their debt, Venezuela was put under a naval blockade for 2 years that impacted their economy. Soon after, Venezuela turned to Teddy Roosevelt and the U.S. government for help to resolve the issue. Theodore Roosevelt saw the benefit of a canal through Panama as it brought forth the idea of a U.S. naval superpower. After the Spanish-American War, Theodore Roosevelt saw the need of a quick way to mobilize his naval fleet to ensure that he could control both seas. There was no air power at the time, therefore the only way you fought an enemy was through the sea. Teddy Roosevelt saw that the canal would expand the power over Puerto Rico, Cuba, and the Caribbean, but also the Philippines. Teddy saw the idea of the rise of a U.S. as a global superpower with both commercial and military potential. Roosevelt looked into the future and saw the advantages of what the canal through Panama would bring the United States, as Teddy believed that the U.S. can become the world's greatest superpower. It also shows Teddy's leadership and proves it to be a success, as the French failed at their attempt at the Panama Canal. Soon after, Teddy bought the right to the canal for $40 million in 1902. Teddy learned from the French failures, as more than 20,000 people died from yellow fever and other diseases during the French failure. Teddy built numerous hospitals around the canal to combat the sickness and shows to benefit, as when the rights were bought to the canal and to the time the canal was finished, 2,000 workers had died. This is significant because with fewer workers getting sick and dying, there will be more work accomplished. As shown, the United States finished the Panama Canal in 12 years. The historical significance of Teddy Roosevelt's leadership through the building and purchasing of the canal is immeasurable, as it was Teddy's most impactful thing he accomplished in foreign affairs when he was in office. That's not only benefits the U.S. but also other countries around the world. As President Roosevelt once said in his autobiography, by far the most important action I took in foreign affairs during the time I was president was related to the Panama Canal. There are plenty of other things I started merely because the time I had come that whoever was in power would have started them. But the Panama Canal would have started if I did not take hold of it, because if I had followed traditional and convenience methods, I should have submitted an admirable state paper to Congress. The debate would proceed at this moment, and the beginning of the work of the canal would be 50 years in the future. Fortunately, the opportunity came at the period when I could act unharpened. Accordingly, I took enthusiasm by starting the canal and then left Congress not to debate the canal but to debate me. The Panama Canal's significance is not only groundbreaking but also vital as to all nations, as it is a gateway to both the Pacific and the Atlantic. Theodore Roosevelt was the key to opening that gateway to the world. Panama declaring independence from Colombia was a major step forward in the future of the Panama Canal. Panamanians had support from Teddy Roosevelt and the United States government to declare independence. The relationship with Teddy Roosevelt and Panama would prove to be significant as their alliance had lasted to this date. The revolution was engineered by Panamanians fiction backed by the Panama Canal Company and the U.S. corporation that hoped to connect the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans with a waterway across the Isthmus of Panama. Teddy Roosevelt ordered a minister of railroads in Panama to remove its trains from the northern terminus of Colon, thus stranding Colombian troops, sending them to crush the revolution. Roosevelt also sent the U.S. warship Nashville to discourage Colombians from marching forward to Panama. On November 6, the United States and Teddy Roosevelt recognized the Republic of Panama, and November 18th, the Hay-Boonville Treaty was signed with Panama, granting the U.S. exclusive permission possessing the Panama Canals. The treaty was negotiated by U.S. Secretary of State and owner of the Panama Canal Company, and it was all led by Teddy Roosevelt. The cause of the Declaration of Panama was for the right to the Panama Canal, as Teddy Roosevelt saw the benefit of the canal in the Republic of Panama rather than being in Colombia. The only consequence was there was a mini revolution with the Panamanians and the Colombians, but Theodore Roosevelt used his naval strength in the Atlantic to put an end to the revolution and to see Panama become a republic. Theodore Roosevelt was a passionate hunter. He loved the thrill of tracking, chasing game, and the skill in marksmanship, the careful, deliberate recording of his observation about each hunt, the demanding of the preservation of the specimen, the pleasure of capturing it so that he can share it with the world. Teddy traveled the world so he can get the excitement of catching different sorts of game. Teddy Roosevelt set out for Africa to hunt big game and collect specimens for the Smithsonian Institution. His decision was based on the desire to leave the politician stage to his successor and his natural need for action. The expedition collected 1,100 specimens, including 500 big game animals, the most net worth collection of big game animals that ever has come out of Africa. Between the two of them, Theodore Roosevelt and his son Kermit slew 512 beasts, including 17 lions, 11 elephants, and 20 rhinoceros. Even though it was cruel to slay all these animals, Roosevelt did it so he can educate the United States and change their perspective of the way they thought of Africa. Theodore Roosevelt, often considered the conservative president here in North Dakota Badlands, where many of his personal concerns first gave rise to his later environmental efforts. A quote from Teddy Roosevelt and his thoughts on conservation of the wildlife. We have become great because of our lavish use of our resources, but the time has come to inquire seriously what will happen when our forests are gone, when the coal, the iron, the oil, and the gas are exhausted, when the soil still furthers to improve and washes into our stream, polluting the rivers. After becoming president in 1901, Roosevelt used his authority to protect wildlife and public lands by creating the United States Forest Service and establishing 150 national forests, 51 federal bird reserves, 4 national game preserves, 5 national parks, 18 national monuments, by enabling the 1906 American Antiquities Act. Theodore Roosevelt protected approximately 230 million acres of public land. Today, the legacy of Theodore Roosevelt is found across the country. There are 6 national park sites dedicated in part or whole to our conservational president, Theodore Roosevelt.